there is this new wave of creators coming into the scene so fast in B2B. And in the past, as you know, you followed the creator economy so closely. There was these creators that just would create content around lifestyle brands and makeup, but now this is just coming into B2B. And these B2B creators are building companies and influencing huge deals. And I would just love to see where you think this future of this B2B creator, this corporate creator is going to go in the next year, 16, 24 months to come.
I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
so many things. It is, like you said, really interesting because a couple years ago, I don't think anybody was thinking about LinkedIn as the place that creators went to. But I think the shift was a couple things. I think the pandemic was a huge thing because everyone all of a sudden is working from home, they're online more. And so I feel like people had more time to be active on LinkedIn and on social media in general, that where TikTok took off really well. And then naturally, you have Gen Z folks who kind of digitally native. TikTok came around, they spent a lot of time there. They're entering the workforce around that time, some of them. And so then they're posting content about their lives, which a lot of times is them going to their corporate job. I remember seeing so many like day in the life at Google or some of these other companies. And I feel like that, in my mind, was kind of this shift in this whole ecosystem of B2B creators. So it started off with folks just kind of like talking about their daily careers. And then people started to see, I think, even more how LinkedIn can open up job opportunities and unlock things for you. And then people start posting stuff on LinkedIn and sharing more of their lives, whereas back in the day it was very professional, right? It was sort of like, hey, I'm going to this event, or I offer these services and I'm trying to find clients. And then people started to share more and more of their lives on LinkedIn. And so that's how I kind of see the evolution. Now, what that means going forward, I think it's just going to be more of that. I think people are more comfortable sharing on LinkedIn now. Obviously, video is a huge thing. So there's a bigger push there. I think there's going to be more and more brand deals because advertisers recognize that they find people that they want to target. So if you go on LinkedIn, you can see, okay, they work for Google or they work for Meta, and people verify their employment. And then they can target people by their position, whether they're a senior VP or an executive. And so it's all these things sort of colliding in this moment. But I think it's been sort of fun to watch over the couple of years that shift. So that's my perspective on kind of how things have changed.
Yeah. Absolutely love it. I love the topic of your role gives you so much credibility. And that only exists on LinkedIn. Like on Instagram, you don't have that you're, senior vice president at Microsoft. That's not in your Instagram bio, but on LinkedIn, like it's your name and it's your role, and your role gives you so much cred. And I love the idea that now as Gen Z, we've been creating content our entire lives, and it's just been so integral to our personal lives through middle school, high school, college, that it only makes sense that now that we're in the corporate world, we're going to be creating content about our corporate jobs. I would love to hear from you how you think this, because creating content becomes the face of these brands. Like it is what the world sees. It's like the look into the day of the life, or a look into the thoughts and the thought leadership from a marketing person inside of a company. Like that's how the world sees these companies. It's becoming so huge to the vision of in the brand around these companies, and the people who are sharing the content are quickly becoming these like brand ambassadors. Where in the past, these Gen Z people are, you had to kind of go up the corporate ladder, and it took a long time. But now there's kind of these loopholes. If you can create content to kind of build up this audience, which we're so good at, you can have more of a say in your career more early on. Do you think there's going to be new job positions that arise, or new types of, like, where you have a job and you do brand deals with your company? Like, where do you think this is all going?
I think it's such a good point about brand ambassadors. I was talking to someone who was working for this sort of tech company, and they started to do content online, and they were kind of wondering what their employer would think about it. And their employer was actually happy about it because they were getting speaking opportunities. They were seen as an expert, and then that reflected well on the company. And so I think this idea of a brand ambassador, it's such a smart move for companies to sort of lean into that, because if people can see what it actually looks like working for your company, or if there's people who are really excited about where they work, right? And they're spreading that and evangelizing that and posting about it, like that's a great thing because they're posting because they like where they work and they're excited. So I think that's actually a good thing for companies to lean into, like let people be brand ambassadors. And obviously there's risk and all these sorts of things, but I think it could be worth it for some folks. Then the other thing you mentioned, right, is this idea that people trust people, right? Like I want to hear from a person rather than an institution. That's kind of the theme of the moment. And so when you think about your company establishing itself as an expert in a space, what do? You send your executive or your VP to a conference to speak, right? Or they go on CNBC or they go on CBS News or something like that. And that kind of establishes them as an expert. And again, that comes back to your company. And so I think seeing more of that, I've seen a lot of people in sales. Maybe they're an entry level salesperson and they start to be really active on LinkedIn and they get more clients and then they're able to move up in their company. And so it's almost like this for some people in some industries, it can really be a boost to your career and to what you're doing, especially if your role involves a lot of meeting people and networking and kind of being out there and being established as an expert. I mean, I've seen folks who are doctors who have been super active on social media, and that's helped them spread more information about myths in the medical community or, you know, catch and kind of like highlight misinformation and correct things. And so it's sort of given them a platform to do that. And then obviously me as a journalist, I use social media so much to find sources and connect with people and get interviews and to just stay on the pulse of things. So I really think it can be helpful to a lot of people in their careers if they sort of lean into it, whether they become a full-time content creator or not. If they're sort of doing their day jobs and then creating some content on the side, it can sort of open up those doors. And then I have seen some people start just sharing about their career and it opens a bunch of doors and then they end up being a full-time content creator. So you never know sort of which way it can go.
Yeah, yeah. You study the creator economy for your job, which is amazing. I just think it's the most incredible, so interesting. I often talk about how there's a lot of similarities with we've all seen the path of like the B2C, basically like the Instagram, the TikTok, the YouTube creator. We've seen this rise of this influencer in the path of these platforms for so long. I would love to hear your thoughts on, based upon these patterns and this, where do you think the future of content on LinkedIn and B2B creators, like where do you think that's going to go and play out?
I think it's going to get a lot more mature and sophisticated. So one of the things, if we think about Instagram or TikTok, in the beginning, nobody was getting paid, right? Everyone was just posting for free. Like you would go on Instagram and you share photos of your life or you're hanging out with your family or you're walking your dog and no one was making money. And then all of a sudden people started to get really popular or maybe celebrities came on or different folks. And then it sort of became this thing of where, oh, if you have a really large audience and you recommend a product to someone, people might buy it. Or if you say, hey, go check out this article, people might actually go read it. And so it's kind of this slow evolution. I think we can take for granted the way it is now, but it wasn't like these social media platforms were built for people to make money off them. They were really just built for people to kind of share about what they're interested in and spend time there. And then the companies would sell advertising and make money. And so it kind of just naturally evolved. And so I think the same thing with LinkedIn, right? People came on there originally to post about jobs and find jobs. And now people are starting to produce content and brands are realizing, oh, these folks have a lot of sway. They have an audience. They've been able to engage people. And so I think what we're going to see is more brands spending money with influencers on LinkedIn. And there's a couple of reasons why maybe that hasn't happened. Again, it's still sort of relatively new in some ways. And then I'm not sure like what the tools are for brands to actually target and work with influencers, because again, it wasn't designed as that. Like LinkedIn was really designed for recruiters to find people, for sales folks, like they kind of sell to other companies. And so it's just a very different platform than Instagram or TikTok. But I think we're going to see more companies pop up. And I've already seen this of like, hey, we're an influencer agency that manages B2B creators. So if you're a Salesforce or a Microsoft and you want to find someone to talk about your company and your products, here's all these influencers that are like experts in this space who can talk about it in a really intelligent way. Or it's going to be like, hey, if you want to spend $100,000 on an influencer campaign, we can manage that spending for you and direct it and do the contracting and kind of like be the middleman. So I think we're going to see more agencies that represent like the creators themselves. So almost like a talent agency. And then also companies are going to help brands manage their spending and actually advertising. So I think it's just going to get more mature, more professionalized, and then that's going to sort of open the door for more folks. Because right now, I imagine it's very manual, right? Like if I'm on LinkedIn and I'm a financial expert, like maybe brands are DMing me or something like that, and that's kind of how we're working. But I think we're going to see it more structured.
Yeah, I love what you said throughout the whole answer, but at the beginning, B2C, Instagram, we post on Instagram and it would just be for fun. And then brands realize that, hey, my target audience is like scrolling here and like consuming your content. If I could just simply like have you talk about my thing, then people are going to like see it, then eventually go use it. And I think brands are having the same epiphany right now on LinkedIn. They're like, okay, we want to target, decision makers, like sales decision makers, marketing decision makers. Where are they spending their time? I think LinkedIn is funny because it's really the only social media platform we're like allowed to use during our 9 to 5s. Like any other platform, we're like, oh yeah, I saw you liking something on Instagram during the day. Like what are you doing? Why aren't you working? But like LinkedIn, it's like encouraged. And so there's this like 8 hours. Right? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's just 8 hours of the day that like you are like allowed to use this social media platform. And so I think we are seeing people scrolling and these decision makers are there. And so these brands starting to tap into it as a media source is just makes so much sense, especially as other media sources become more crowded with brand deals. Everyone's looking to find new places. And I totally think it's coming to fruition. There are agencies starting to reach out. I mean, I get more and more messages like over the past 18 months. It went from like what even is, B2B marketing deals on LinkedIn. And now it's just more of a norm. And just like seeing it firsthand and now being able to go like right now, we're even building technology right now that connects these B2B brands with these corporate creators because we just believe so heavily that these corporate creators are kind of the next step in the process right now of just such a valuable art audience. I always talk about these corporate creators. I think corporate creators are people that have 9 to 5 jobs, but have insane credibility because of their roles in the companies that they're at. And they have insane expertise because they're living and breathing and they're doing their work every single day. They're learning, they're at the cusp of their industries. And so if a marketing professional can partner with a marketing tool and say, hey, I actually like this tool, it's like the credibility and the quality of audience. Because the quality of audience is that people in the audiences are just like the same type of people. I think it will be a really, really cool media channel for these companies to partner with this year.
I think that's such a good point because I sometimes I think about like, and I'm not trying to pick on anyone individually, but like Salesforce, right? They have all these commercials with Matthew McConaughey, and I'm like, is he using Salesforce? Like, what does he need Salesforce for? Like, it's just so random, right? And like, I'm sure like they continue to work with him, so I'm sure it's effective in some way. But like, if there was someone who was like, hey, I'm a salesperson, I've closed $1 million in sales each year. Here's how I use Salesforce. That carries more weight to me if I'm thinking about actually buying something than like Matthew, as much as I like him as an actor, like he doesn't have anything to do with Salesforce. So I do think that credibility piece is could be really powerful.
Yeah. And we've seen the same thing when we talk about like step by steps of B2C versus B2B. Like B2C, we used to just see brand deals with like Kylie Jenners of the world, like these major celebrities. And now the biggest thing right now is these micro creators, nano creators, because their audiences are just so connected to this person that if they give a recommendation for a product, it just works. And I think right now in B2B, we're seeing the partnerships with these large companies, and we're even seeing like HubSpot buying up different large podcasting channels, and like they're taking up these like the big guys, which is like the Kylie Jenner equivalent in B2B. That I feel like eventually soon we're going to see these marketing dollars trickle down the way towards these other people that are maybe don't have as big of audiences, but just have so much cred.
I think that's true. And then engagement, right? Sometimes what people call these micro or nano influencers, these folks have crazy engagement because maybe they're really focused on a specific niche, right? Like maybe you're an influencer who talks about keyboards and the best keyboards to use for your home office setup. Maybe you have 1,000 people following you, but it's like every keyboard that you mentioned sells out because you're like the keyboard guru. So it's kind of fun to see folks lean into these really niche areas and actually get amazing brand deals from that because they're the go-to person for that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I want to hear more too. I think you have a really unique perspective on this, but where the future of the media landscape is going, I think right now, media companies are turning towards creatorship in a huge way, like going out there and either empowering the people to become creators or creating their own podcasts. Like they're just realizing, and like you spoke about on LinkedIn too, like even the White House is inviting creators into into the decision and like to come and learn about this content at such a cutting edge time. Like creatorship is such a big thing to reach audiences and to get in front of the right people that I think traditional media is landing into in a big way. Like, would love to hear your thoughts on what's happening right now and also what's coming in the next year or so.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, especially as someone who's in, in the media as a journalist, sort of kind of watching it from this perspective. I think there's so many things, some of which are good and some of which are challenges. I think the good is that a lot of people are empowered to share their voice and their perspective on social media. A lot of good can come out of that, right? People are building community, they're finding other people to relate with that maybe they don't in their day-to-day lives. And there are some people out there with real expertise that they're sharing, they're informing people. I think about, here in LA, obviously we've experienced the LA fires and there were so many people doing citizen journalism and kind of sharing updates and resources. Like that's the power of social media and and a media landscape where everybody has a phone and is able to share information. The challenges come with like misinformation in fact checking and things being able to spread online that aren't true. And then people buy into the right because they're just hearing them online. So I think those are the challenges that we face for traditional media organizations. A lot of it is just like this fight for attention. So people are spending all their time on TikTok or on YouTube or maybe on a Netflix or so on and so forth. And so you're fighting for attention amongst all these different platforms, right? So you have the like traditional kind of cable channels, and then you have the streamers like a Netflix, and then you have social media, and then you have, the Bloomberg, Washington Post, New York Times. And so you're fighting for attention against these like social media platforms that are designed to have you keep scrolling and stay engaged, right? And so one of the ways that newsrooms have adapted to that is, I mean, obviously posting stories to social media. So all these like major news outlets have their own social channels. They're posting there. Us as journalists are encouraged to post also. But then what we saw was like some of these platforms deprioritizing news. So Meta has been a big one, deprioritizing news on Facebook and Instagram, meaning that they're not going to proactively recommend news and political content unless you're searching for it and you want that. And so we sort of seen that. And then deprioritizing links. That's something that X has done since Elon Musk acquired Twitter, where if you put a link to something in your first post, it was a little bit deprioritized, right? Because they want you to stay on their app versus being directed somewhere else. And so it's all those little shifts like that where news organizations can't necessarily rely on social media platforms for traffic. And a lot of them will tell you, right, that the traffic has gone down. They're like, we're not seeing as much traffic from Twitter as we used to, from X as we used to back in the day. And so that means that they have to sort of adapt. And one of the ways is individual journalists building their social following. So some journalists have thousands or millions of followers in social media. Some have gone on to become content creators. Taylor Lorenz is a good example. Works for a lot of the major news outlets, built a social following, and now is a content creator full time. And so there's a ton of different things going on at once. But I think people, as we mentioned earlier, are really leaning into trusting individuals. And so allowing individuals to kind of step forward and share their expertise and build their brand and their presence helps the news organization, helps the news institution that you're working for. Um, but then again, like I said, right, the challenges of misinformation and people believing things from folks that are not doing the fact checking process, that are not going through an editorial process or having legal review or talking to a bunch of people and making sure all the things are right. They're kind of just putting their opinion, or maybe they're sharing something that they don't fully understand. And I think that's where the challenge lies. But that's where folks who are experts in their particular area can just sort of do their best to establish their credibility and their brand. But who knows what's going to happen, right? I mean, it feels like it's shifting every other day, and um, but it'll be interesting to watch. And then, I mean, you mentioned influencers. going to the White House, right? So I think over 7,000 people applied to get a press credential for the White House within 24 hours of them sort of opening this portal. And so we're going to see more of that. Obviously, last year, a lot of people are calling the influencer election, where influencers were interviewing Trump and Harris and folks like Theo Vaughn and Joe Rogan and Aiden Ross and all these folks were doing these interviews with the presidential candidates. So, I mean, that's been a huge shift. So I think influencers and content creators, people who have platforms, are going to be invited into those rooms a lot more for a couple of reasons. One is just their audience. Another is that they might ask questions that a traditionally trained journalist might not, which can be good. At the same time, they may not ask some of those sort of hard-hitting questions that a journalist from a legacy media institution might ask. So we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more independent news organizations and publications pop up. A lot of them are being done on Substack, like the Free Press, and so it's just going to be completely different. I think we're going to see content creators everywhere. I mean, there were, I think, Olympics last year, the Super Bowl, all major events. I think you're going to see influencers and content creators, including news events, including political events. I think that's going to continue. And how like the legacy media interacts with that, I mean, I think there's room for both, right? I think both can be needed and both can be important. It's just a shifting landscape.
Yeah.
And like they're going to be in the room.
Super interesting. Kind of even like extending it out to like the B2B world. I think the same way that we had influencers at the Olympics and influencers playing a big hand in the election, I think we're going to see a rise of influencers with big corporate events like Dreamforce, like all of these big events that happen. I think that soon they're going to have a big like influencer strategy in the mix too, because I love what you said where they might not be asking as like hard hitting questions, but one thing that content creators know what to do well is how to create content that resonates with an audience, but also, creates engagement with an audience. Like they do it so well because they've built a livelihood up of like, how do I start this? Like, this is what I do all the time. Like, how do I start this video so when people want to keep watching? And that's important if you want to get a message across, like starting it well, like so that there's more retention throughout the video. And so I think having this, so many thoughts, but like I think having this rise of this like B2B influencer into these new spaces in B2B in this next year, I think will be huge. I think we'll see more people at conferences, more people speaking at conferences that are influencers. I think we'll see like cool brand trips that are around like B2B influencers, that the same way that we had people going to Coachella, I think we'll have people coming to these like brand trips or company headquarters to when like a release of a new product. They'll make a bunch of videos about it. And it's really cool to see LinkedIn kind of playing into this new realm of creating content, Gen Z coming to the game with like all their new videos on LinkedIn. I think this is such a huge shift and such a huge look and glimpse into what LinkedIn is wanting to do in the next year with like focusing on video content and creating this whole new tab. There's only 5 tabs down there. So we have to boot one to put this one in there is like huge. And so I think it's interesting to see where these huge creator economy, just macro trends is going to extend into an industry that has more money than any industry out there, these B2B companies in this B2B industry. And so it will be definitely fun to see in this next year.
I think you're so right about the corporate events. I mean, I was at Meta Connect last year and they invited a bunch of creators to be there and some of them interviewed Mark Zuckerberg. So I think you're totally right. We're going to see more creators at events like that. And I don't remember if they were in the press room, but I remember there's a certain amount of, spots for press and a certain amount of spots for creators. And they talked about how they want to have more creators at these events. I don't know if that means there will be less press or maybe it'll be an equal amount, but the point being content creators are going to be at some of these big events that were traditionally reserved for the traditional media.
Yeah, totally.